The basement in our house was off limits. My parents were strict about it, saying it was unsafe. Old wood, loose stairs, maybe even rats. But I always felt there was more to it than that. Whenever I passed the heavy door at the end of the hallway. Have you ever heard footsteps following you in an empty hallway? What would you do if they didn't stop, even after you locked the door? I felt a strange pull, as if the basement itself was calling me. I ignored it for years, until the night I heard my name. It was past midnight, and the house was silent. I was half asleep when I heard it, soft, almost a whisper. Usman. My name, spoken slowly, as if testing the sound. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. At first I thought it was my parents, but the sound came again, this time clearer. It was coming from the basement. Curiosity outweighed fear. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the hallway, my bare feet making no noise on the wooden floor. If you found an old childhood drawing of yours that you didn't remember making, and it showed a shadowy figure standing behind you, would you keep it or throw it away? The basement door stood ajar, the darkness behind it thicker than I expected. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping now, like a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. The air was damp and cold, and the flashlight barely pierced the gloom. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, but at the center of the room, something caught my eye. A figure stood there, its back to me. Have you ever turned off all the lights and felt like someone was standing right behind you? What would you do if you heard them breathe? It was tall and hunched, draped in tattered, shadowy fabric that seemed to ripple as if alive. It wasn't my parents, or anyone I recognized. "Who's there?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. The figure didn't turn around immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. Then, slowly, it turned. Its face was pale, stretched, and featureless, except for two deep, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. A grin spread across its face, wide and unnatural, and it whispered my name again. "Usman." I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam of light spun wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. If you woke up at midnight and saw your bedroom door wide open, when you clearly remember shutting it, would you go check or pretend you didn't see it? The figure began to move toward me, its feet dragging across the floor. Its whispers grew louder, turning into guttural sounds that echoed in my ears. Panicked, I scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, my hands trembling, and collapsed against it, gasping for air. The whispers didn't stop. They continued through the night, muffled but persistent. When morning came, I told my parents what I had seen. They exchanged worried glances but refused to talk about it. That night, they nailed the basement door shut. Years later, after we moved out, I heard that the new owners had torn the house down. There was a playground at the edge of our neighborhood that everyone avoided after sunset. By day, it was ordinary enough. Rusty swings, a squeaky merry-go-round, and a slide with peeling paint. But at night, strange things happened. Have you ever woken up at night and felt like someone was standing at the edge of your bed, watching you? What if they were still there when you turned the light on? The swings moved on their own, creaking slowly in the still air. Sometimes faint laughter echoed, high-pitched and unnatural, though the playground was empty. One summer evening, my friends and I decided to investigate. We were 13, full of bravado, and eager to prove the rumors wrong. Armed with flashlights and a cheap camcorder, we crept to the playground just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air felt colder than it should have, and a heavy silence settled over the park, broken only by the occasional groan of the swings. If you found an old voice recording of yourself as a child, but it included someone else's voice you didn't recognize, would you dare to listen to the rest? At first, nothing happened. We joked and dared each other to sit on the swings. But then the laughter began. It started faint, like a whisper carried on the wind, and grew louder, as though unseen children surrounded us. The swings began to sway, not in unison but chaotically, as if an invisible force was pushing them. The merry-go-round creaked, spinning slowly on its own. "Maybe it's the wind," Sarah said, though her voice trembled. Have you ever passed by a mirror and thought, just for a moment, that your reflection wasn't following your movements? What would you do if it smiled at you when you weren't smiling back? But there was no wind. The trees were still, their branches motionless. Then we saw it, a shadow darting between the playground equipment. It was small, childlike, but unnaturally fast. Our flashlights caught glimpses of it, but never fully. Its laughter grew louder, sharper, and somehow closer. When the slide's ladder began rattling violently, we froze. A figure stood at the top, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. It had no face, just a smooth, dark surface where its features should have been. We ran. The laughter followed us, echoing in our ears even after we'd reached the safety of the streetlights. If your phone rang in the middle of the night and the caller ID showed your own number, would you answer? What if the voice on the other end sounded like you, but wasn't? None of us spoke about that night again, but we avoided the playground after dark. A week later, the playground was fenced off without explanation. The swings were gone, the slide dismantled. The neighborhood kids said it was because of the thing that played there, and though no one ever saw it again. When I was 12, I loved exploring my grandmother's attic. It was a treasure trove of dusty antiques and forgotten keepsakes. One day, while rummaging through old trunks and moth-eaten clothes, I stumbled upon a tall, ornate mirror tucked away in the corner. Have you ever walked into a room and felt a sudden chill, as though someone invisible was standing next to you? What if they never left? Its gilded frame was cracked and tarnished, but the glass was surprisingly pristine, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. At first glance, it was just a mirror. But when I looked closer, I noticed something odd. Reflections that didn't match the room. Behind me in the glass, I could see furniture that wasn't there, an old rocking chair, a grandfather clock, and a dimly flickering candle. Thinking it was some kind of trick or illusion, I waved it off as my imagination. If you found an old photo of yourself as a child, taken somewhere you've never been, would you try to find out who took it? What if you saw something sinister in the background? That night, curiosity got the better of me. After everyone went to bed, I crept back into the attic with a flashlight. The mirror stood silently in the corner, its surface gleaming as though it were alive. I stepped closer, and this time, the reflection showed more. A woman in an old-fashioned dress sat in the rocking chair, her back turned to me. The chair creaked softly, though the room itself was silent. "Hello?" I whispered, half expecting her to answer. Have you ever stared at an empty doorway and felt like something was staring back at you from the darkness? What do you think it was waiting for? She didn't move, but then as I stared, her head twisted slowly around. Not her body, just her head. Her face was pale and hollow, her eyes sunken black pits. A grotesque smile stretched across her lips as she mouthed something I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of boxes. When I looked again, she was gone, but the rocking chair was still there, swaying slightly, as if someone had just risen from it. The air around me felt cold, heavy, and suffocating. If you woke up to find muddy footprints leading from your front door to your bed, but all the doors and windows were locked, would you dare to follow where they came from? Terrified, I ran downstairs and told my grandmother what I'd seen. Her face went pale. "That mirror belonged to my mother," she said quietly. "She always said it showed things that shouldn't be seen. I thought I'd gotten rid of it." The next morning, the mirror was gone. My grandmother refused to tell me what she'd done with it, and I didn't press her. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that woman's face, smiling at me from the darkness. I don't know where the mirror went, but I pray no one else ever finds it. When I was 8, I used to love playing with the shadows cast on my bedroom walls by the streetlights outside. I'd make shapes with my hands and watch them dance. One night, as I lay in bed, I noticed a shadow near the corner of my room. It was shaped like a small child, standing perfectly still. At first I thought it was mine, cast by some trick of the light, but then it moved, without me moving. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were completely alone? What would you do if you turned around and saw nothing there, but felt it get closer? Curious, I sat up expecting to see someone or something in the room. There was no one, just the shadow. It seemed playful, bouncing on the wall like a kid skipping rope. It waved at me, and without thinking I waved back. It felt strange but innocent, like an imaginary friend that had suddenly come to life. For a while, the shadow became part of my nights. It would mimic my movements, sometimes adding its own playful gestures. I told my parents, but they laughed it off as a child's overactive imagination. "You're dreaming," they said. I started to believe them, until the night it stopped mimicking me. I was lying in bed, watching the shadow bounce along the wall, when it froze suddenly. Its head tilted toward me, its movement no longer playful but deliberate. Slowly, it raised a hand and pointed at me. My stomach dropped. I wasn't moving, but it was. If you found a door in your house that you'd never noticed before, would you open it? What if you heard faint whispers coming from the other side? It started to crawl across the wall, closer to my bed. Panicking, I turned on the bedside lamp, hoping to make it disappear. Instead, the light seemed to embolden it. The shadow grew darker, deeper, and stretched off the wall, spilling onto the floor. It slithered toward me, its shape no longer resembling a child but something monstrous, with 2 long limbs and hollow eyes that glowed faintly. I screamed, and my parents came rushing in. By the time they turned on the overhead light, the shadow was gone. I tried to explain, but they told me I'd had a bad dream. I knew better. That shadow wasn't a dream. It was real, and it wasn't done with me. For weeks, I refused to sleep in that room, but eventually I was forced to return. The shadow was waiting, lurking in the corner, watching. It never played again. Instead, it stayed still, always watching, until one night it disappeared altogether. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and been unable to move, only to see a dark figure standing by your bed? What do you think it wanted? I don't know where it went, but sometimes, late at night, I see flickers of movement in the corners of my vision, and I wonder if it's still playing somewhere, waiting for me to notice. Here are 4 spine-chilling questions to engage your audience and stir their imagination. 1. What would you do if the shadows on your wall suddenly came to life? 2. Could you sleep knowing something might be watching you from the darkness? 3. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen in the reflection of a window or mirror? Would you still trust it if it moved when you didn't? Have you ever seen movement in the corner of your eye and felt too afraid to turn and look? 4. What if the things you dismissed as nightmares were actually warnings from something real? When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a creaky old house at the edge of the woods. My room was small but cozy except for the closet. It was an ancient thing with a warped wooden door that never quite shut properly. Have you ever heard someone call your name when you were alone at home? What if it wasn't your imagination? At night, when everything else in the house was still, I could hear faint whispers coming from inside. I told my parents, but they dismissed it as my imagination. "It's an old house," they said. "It makes noises." At first, I tried to ignore it. I'd bury my head under the covers, humming to drown out the whispers. But over time, the sounds grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't random creaks or the wind. It was voices, soft, overlapping murmurs, like a crowd whispering secrets just beyond the threshold. What's the scariest thing you've seen in the corner of your eye, only for it to vanish when you turn to look? One night, curiosity got the better of me. The moonlight streamed through my window, casting a pale glow on the closet door. My heart pounded as I crept out of bed and pressed my ear against the old wood. The whispers became clearer. They were speaking my name. "Usman, Usman, come closer." The way they said it was both soothing and sinister, like a lullaby with a hidden threat. I don't know what possessed me to open the door, but I did. Slowly, the hinges groaned in protest, and the inside of the closet seemed impossibly dark, as though it led somewhere far deeper than it should. The whispers stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. Then I saw it. 2 pinpricks of glowing yellow light, staring back at me from the void. Frozen in place, I couldn't scream, couldn't move, as the thing inside began to emerge. A pale hand with elongated fingers reached out, grasping the edge of the doorframe. Its face was unlike anything human, distorted, with a grotesque grin that stretched impossibly wide. "You shouldn't have listened," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I slammed the door shut with all my strength and ran to my bed, trembling under the covers until morning. When the sunlight finally filtered in, I mustered the courage to look again. The closet was empty, its contents untouched, but the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. From that day on, I never opened the closet at night. If you woke up at 3 a.m. and saw a shadow standing at the foot of your bed, what would you do? The whispers continued, growing quieter as the years went by, but I never dared to listen again. Even now, as an adult, I avoid closets altogether. Sometimes, though, I wake in the dead of night and swear I can still hear those voices, calling my name from the shadows. Here are 4 scary questions designed to engage your audience and send a chill down their spine. 1. What would you do if you heard your name whispered in the dead of night by a voice that wasn't there? 2. If you opened a door and saw glowing eyes staring back at you, would you run or freeze? Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt like your reflection moved differently than you did? What if it wasn't just a trick of the light? 3. Could you sleep knowing there might be something lurking just a few feet away in the darkness? 4. Do you think the things we fear as children ever truly leave us, or do they just wait for us to come back? Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.